Second short notes, the most important short notes in the head and neck area is external jugular vein. External jugular vein, if it is asked, is a blood vessel. If blood vessel is asked, especially the vein is asked, you have to write about the formation. So formation, how will you write the formation? You need to draw a diagram again. So we have to draw the sternocleidomastoid, two heads of sternocleidomastoid, and the clavicle that is getting inserted in the mastoid process, and here is your mandible, and from the ear, this is your ear. Okay, this is your ear. So behind the ear, if artery is coming, a vein is coming, that is called as posterior auricular vein behind the ear. So that's called as posterior auricular vein. And here from the behind the mandible, if it is coming, that is called as retromandibular vein. So retromandibular vein will be having two divisions. One is called posterior division, another one is called anterior division. We don't bother about the anterior division, we want only the posterior division. Posterior division of the retromandibular vein joins with the posterior auricular vein and forms the external jugular vein. Then the external jugular vein comes over the sternocleidomastoid, and then it comes down and it pierces the deep cervical fascia. It is lying on the deep cervical fascia. So you have to draw, it is lying on the deep cervical fascia, right? This is the area where you have your investing layer of deep cervical fascia. It's lying on the deep cervical fascia, and then it pierces the deep cervical fascia. It pierces the deep cervical fascia and drains into a vein called subclavian vein. It enters deep and drains into the vein called subclavian vein, right? Okay, so again I'll tell the formation. Posterior auricular vein behind the ear, posterior auricular vein joins with the posterior division of the retromandibular vein. So we'll write this as posterior auricular vein joins with this is the retromandibular vein. Which division? Posterior division of the retromandibular vein. We don't want the anterior division, and they join the external jugular vein. External jugular vein is lying on the sternocleidomastoid and lying on the investing layer of deep cervical fascia. Cervical fascia, it surrounds the neck, and then it comes down, pierces the deep cervical fascia, and deep inside you will be having a vein called subclavian vein. It drains into the subclavian vein. So it terminates into the subclavian vein. So number one, formation, we have to write posterior auricular vein joins with the posterior division of retromandibular vein. And then course lies on the sternocleidomastoid and then lies on the deep cervical fascia. That too investing layer, you have to write investing layer of deep cervical fascia, and then termination. It pierces the deep cervical fascia just above the clavicle, and then terminates into the subclavian vein, and then subclavian vein. And the tributaries are you have to write two anterior tributaries and two posterior tributaries. Two posterior tributaries are from here, you have to write two posterior tributaries. Number one is posterior external jugular vein. One is coming from here, that is called posterior external jugular vein. From here scapula, it is coming subsuprascapular vein. From the anterior jugular vein is coming, and transverse cervical vein is coming. So two anterior, two posterior. So two posterior external jugular vein, posterior external jugular. Another one is suprascapular vein. These two are coming from behind. One is posterior external jugular and suprascapular vein. Two are coming from anterior. That is called as transverse cervical vein. Another one is jugular. This is the jugular notch, the sternum. Okay, that is anterior jugular vein. So these four veins you have to write. As tributaries. And clinical anatomy, you have to write about air embolism. What is air embolism? You have to write. Okay, the vein is adherent with the lumen of the vein is adherent with the deep cervical fascia. So deep cervical fascia doesn't have the capacity to contract. So if the vein is cut, it cannot, the deep cervical fascia cannot contract. So the air, external air enters into the external into the external jugular vein, and then it blocks the drainage of the venous channels into the right atrium. This is called as air embolism. This is called air embolism. The venous wall, the vein wall of the vein is adherent to the deep cervical fascia. Since if the vein is cut, the deep cervical fascia cannot contract, or it's not able to contract. So the external air will enter into the external jugular vein, and then it blocks the drainage side. It is called as air embolism. It's a very important clinical application point you are supposed to write. That's all about the external jugular vein. Formation 1 marks, and the course 1 mark, 1 plus 2, and termination 3, tributaries 4, clinical anatomy 5. This is how you have to write about the external jugular vein. Thank you.